Ladies and gentlemen, today's video is a poker video about folding pocket jacks preflop without investing a penny. It is a video about 3-betting 10-7 off in the big blind. It is a video about playing 5 deuce suited by calling an open raise. It's a video about 4-betting pocket 7s in early position. This is a poker video about stuff that you don't know that you can do. And this isn't stuff that you have to do, but it's solver approved stuff. And when something's okay in theory, you can bet that there's going to be a set of real world conditions where you should actually be doing that thing. So let's open your minds a bit about the first street of this beautiful game. Let's smash down some of the walls and rules and mantras that you've constructed over the years. And let's start playing better exploitative preflop poker by looking at some of the cool stuff that you can do in theory. Let's go. This first one is super weird. This is a program called Simple Preflop that I'm using here, and I'm using the rake structure of 500 NL on PokerStars. For today's purposes, you may find this differs slightly if you use lower stake ranges that have different rake structures. But yeah, this is quite illuminating, and I don't want you guys to worry about the exact frequencies that things are happening at or the exact EVs that are being displayed over here, but we will be referencing the EV of different plays here in this little panel here. I think that's super important. In this action sequence, Under the Gun in a 6-max cash game has opened to 2.5 big blinds. You can trace this down here to see that we've actually got hijack to fold and cut off to 3-bet to 7.5 big blinds. Button, small blind and big blind all fold, and then Under the Gun has the option of 4-betting, calling or folding. The 4-bet's going to be to 20 big blinds, 100 BBs deep. And pocket 7s is indeed a 4-bet at a low frequency, in theory. But most importantly, the EV of flatting, folding and calling with this hand are all just balanced on a knife edge. So this is truly an indifferent hand. You can't say the same thing for 10s, which is like a big mistake to fold here, or even 9s, which is better to call or 4-bet than it is to fold here. When you get down to 8s, it's a little bit less clear, and 7s is the first hand that's really indifferent between folding and calling. But what's really kind of crazy here is that you can 4-bet this hand as well. And I'm willing to bet that like less than 1 in 20 of you ever make this play. Why do you not make that play? Well, it doesn't strike you as like a good bluffing hand because it doesn't have a lot of premium blockers to aces or ace king or kings, which are the main things you're normally trying to block when you're 4-betting. But nevertheless, there's some advantages to this play. One of them is that this hand is what we'd call survivable when you get called. So if you look at the range that cutoff is meant to really continue with against your 4-bet, there isn't really a lot of jam in this early position skirmish. Like a lot of ace king is just going to be calling here. Queens will never be jamming in theory. Kings isn't even a pure jam. Aces does a lot of slow play. Ace-king suited is the only hand in this sim that's pure jamming in response. And so we are getting called by hands that we're kind of crushing, like these suited connectors down here are ace-5 suited. So that's the survivability. If we do get peeled by suited broadways or ace-king off, we're obviously flipping against the former and we're a slight favorite against the latter. So this hand is just in better shape than you would think in the first place here. The other thing that's going on with pocket 7s is that you're denying a ton of equity. So if you look at the range that cutoff actually folds to the 4-bet here, it's very often going to be hands that are either ahead of 7s, so that in some sense this is actually a bluff because 9s, when it 3-bets here, isn't always calling the 4-bet. Same thing with pocket 10s. These hands are not always calling. They are mixing fold. They're basically 0 EV continues at this rake structure against the 4-bet. So not only are you getting bigger pocket pairs to fold at some frequency, now I think in the real world, people don't really actually 3-bet these hands and then fold to a 4-bet that often. I don't think it's a super common thing. But in theory, they're meant to fold about half the time, something like that. But not even just that, but the overcards that are meant to fold all of the time here, like the Queen Jack suited, King 10 suited, Ace 8 suited, Ace 9, Ace Queen, King Queen, these hands are obviously extremely live against 7s. So it makes a bit more sense than you would think to actually go ahead and 4-bet a hand like this. So what do we do with that information? Does that mean that if you go off and nail this magical frequency and you actually manage to find the 4-bet 12.47% of the time, that a magic beanstalk will grow from the roof of your house and you may clamber up said beanstalk into the poker heavens and the gods will shower you with gold dust for hitting the magic GTO frequency? Is that what's happening? No. What's happening is, and this is fortunately the case, right? Because if it wasn't, this would be a terrible game that we actually play if we were just that indifferent and we were just had to hit 14% frequencies. What's fortunately the case here is that we are going to prefer one line to the other in reality. So if we think that Villain is some kind of really tight player with a super strong 3-bet range, we probably don't ever want to 4-bet 7s. But if we do think that they 3-bet a lot but don't play very well in 4-bet pots, for example, which is most regs that play kind of low stakes online, they neglect 4-bet pots. I've spoken about this before. Then we probably do want to go ahead and 4-bet the 7. So there's lots of worlds in which we actually want to make this play, not just sometimes, not just as an RNG, but all of the time. You might have a read that makes it clear to you that 4-betting this hand is either really bad or really good. And when something is really bad or really good, you do it always or never. You don't just mix. So take this example. You wake up and you get out of your bed in the morning, and a package that you've ordered from Amazon has arrived, and it's like a new book that you're really looking forward to reading. And you could either burn that book, or you could open it and read the book at your earliest convenience with a nice cup of hot coffee. Do you RNG between those two outcomes? No, because one is clearly way better than the other. Yet, the GTO nerds will sometimes RNG in the real world in poker an absurd outcome. Like I taught a guy a few weeks ago for the first time who told me that until recently, he'd been RNGing every spot that he faced a bet on the river against a fish. So take the other outcome, like you wake up in the morning and you start shaving, you get your razor out, you start shaving. If you're a guy, you're shaving your face. If you're a girl, maybe you're shaving your legs, I don't know, but you're shaving, you've got this razor. And you have the option of stabbing yourself and slicing your skin up with the razor. Do you RNG that and then putting vinegar in it? Do you RNG that? Do you roll 5%, slice up your skin and pour vinegar into the wound? Or do you just shave normally and get on with it and go about your day? Obviously you do the latter and you do it 100% of the time. So when we look at mixing in this video, for the rest of this video, I want you guys to remember that GTO is a setup. It's rigged. It's set up so that you are indifferent. And maybe in the real world, you can't figure out what plays better. Or maybe your opponent's that good and that balanced and, you know, it's just kind of hiding behind a really strong strategy and you can't figure out where their leaks are or their holes are. And in that case, okay, maybe you just roll some fucking frequency. It doesn't really matter, okay? If you're playing in a super high visibility game where you're playing the same people all the time, maybe you want to be roughly balanced there. But let's just let go of the fact that our default play should be mixing. I want you guys to look at pocket sevens next time you're under the gun and you get 3-bet by the cutoff. And I want you to say, could this be the kind of reg that's playing meekly, who's 3-betting a lot, maybe even too much, but is playing meekly, not jamming much against 4-bets and playing badly in 4-bet pots? If you think your opponent fits that bill, and no GTO nerds, you don't need exact reads. It's not the case that the only way to know that your opponent is playing badly in 4-bet pots is to have a 6 billion hand sample on them where they have X, Y, and Z stats in 4-bet pots. No, you can just know because like you've played against them for a few thousand hands and you've just seen how they play and they just play too passively and too meekly. And then you can go ahead and 4-bet the 7s and happy days. I want you guys to know that this sort of play is possible. Now that we've got a bit of protocol, a bit of housekeeping out the way, let's speed up and go through the other 9 cool preflop plays that you didn't know you could make, because if we don't speed up, this editor's going to get really annoyed at me because the video is going to be 2 hours long. So let's get going. All right, this one is really fun. The good old 3-bet with the 10-7 offsuit blind versus blind. The blind versus blind 3-bet range is the kind of range that banks on the fact that villain doesn't get to do very well out of position. Basically, what this range wants to do is it only wants to reopen action with 2 types of hands. Value 3-bets that are clearly just inclined to build the pot, like pocket 10s or pocket 9s or king jack suited, picking the less obvious ones here, of course, like ace king suited 3-bets all the time here as well. And then bluffs that don't mind opening the action, getting 4-bet and then folding. So you have hands like 10-3 suited, 10-2 suited, the good old Doyle, Brunson, RIP, and then 10-7 off is just kind of our case in point for today, which is a very bizarre hand. Like you look at this hand and you think, well, that's dog shit. Like I'm not playing that. That's going in the muck. Or maybe you say, oh, I'll cry and call because I think I can outplay this guy if you're feeling a bit adventurous or something like that. But very few of us actually 3-bet this hand. And I know GTO nerds, I get it. Maybe your chart doesn't say this. Like maybe your chart only has a sliver or your particular chart doesn't ever, you know, people say, doesn't ever 3-bet this hand. My chart doesn't ever do it. It's like, okay, but like, what does it say the EV is? Oh wait, your chart doesn't have EV? Well, that's a shame. That's a shame for you. Because the EV here of 3-betting this hand is basically the same as folding it. And I doubt there's going to be any other chart with the same rake structure that thinks that this is a disaster. It might think it's a little bit losing. But all I'm trying to get across here is not that this is the one and only chart and all the other charts are wrong. It's just that when you have a hand that's on the cusp like this, that isn't a big EV loss to 3-bet and that some charts are 3-betting, there's going to be some opponents that this 3-bet is absolutely fucking amazing against. Like, no exaggeration here. There will be opponents that this is making more money than Jack 9 is against GTO. So Jack 9 and GTO is a third of a big blind, almost, between a quarter and a third of a big blind, better to 3-bet than it is to fold. And there will be opponents against whom 10-7 is the same. It's a third of a big blind better to 3-bet than it is to fold. So who are these people and how do you identify them? Well, one, they're just fish that open wide. because fish play really badly. They don't 4-bet you enough, and even if they station your 3-bet a little bit, they play really badly after the flop. But the main person you want to do this against is the nitty ABC reg, is the guy that thinks he's following range charts and thinks he's playing GTO, but is actually just playing like a nit. And that's the person you want to 3-bet with a 10-7 off. And I would say to you, next time you're against that guy, if you're playing in a big Zoom pool where you don't play that many hands against the net, just go ahead and do it 100% of the time. Like, don't even roll it. This is the point where the GTO nerds say, but won't I be over bluffing? And the answer is yes, you will be over bluffing. And why have you assumed that that's undesirable? That's exactly what you should be doing against an ABC Joe Bloggs net that's going to fold way too often with hands that should be 4-betting. You know, if you look at the way small blind's meant to react here, there's going to be some 4-bets that people have to make that they don't. If you're playing against a really nitty reg, they probably never 4-bet you with Queen Jack offsuit or Queen 10 offsuit or King 7 suited. They're probably just mostly playing call and then nettily after the flop or fold. And against that kind of player, the 10-7 off is like a literal gold mine. You should just always go for it with that hand. Don't take one look at a terrible hand, blind versus blind in position, and assume that you can't 3-bet it. There's other countless examples here. King 5 offsuit, 9 5 suited, 10 4 suited. It's a super polar range, yet a lot of people I've taught start off with a default approach of like 3-betting with Queen 8 suited here. And that's actually really horrible. That's a really big EV loss because that's a bang in the middle of the road hand that doesn't ever want to get 4-bet, has an absolute plummet in EV if it does get 4-bet, and just wants to always see the flop. If you're playing against a terrible fish, you can 3-bet Queen 8 suited. You can ignore this. And the reason for that is that they will basically never 4-bet you without a hand that's crushing you anyway, and they will play really badly against the 3-bet and play really badly in a bigger pot. So I don't even hate deviating to the extent of 3-betting hands like this against some fish, but do know that the GTO here is to go super polar, reopen with hands that have some kind of vague prospects but aren't really caring if they get 4-bet, and big value hands, offsuit hands with blockers are good. Start playing big blind versus small blind better. This is the spot that's really misplayed at micro stakes and low stakes. Yes, you heard it correctly, guys. You are not being deceived by your eyes. What I put on screen there is 100% true. You can indeed flat stuff out of the small blind, especially against early position raises. Why do people think that you can't do this? There's two reasons. One is that people like to scare you. They like to put stuff on Twitter that says, or on X, I should say, sorry, Elon, that say stuff like, never flat the small blind. Flatting the small blind is dangerous. If you flat the small blind, you will lose all of your money and you will suffer and you will live in a tent by the side of the road and you won't even have a house or a router to play online poker with anymore. And that's not true, because actually you don't go broke just because you flat pocket 8s out of the small blind. It has the same EV in theory as a flat, as it does as a fold, as it does as a raise against under the gun. Let's take a few scenarios. So let's say that ABC Joe Bloggs net opens and you have 8s. You should just 3-bet. Just 3-bet ABC Joe Bloggs reg with 8s. It's just going to be a really good thing. I wonder if there are actually people called Joe Bloggs. That would be super unfortunate. Let me know if that's your real name in the comments. So who would you flat this hand against? Well, let's say that a 40 big blind fish opens to 3x under the gun and you have pocket 8s. Or let's say that they have 60 big blinds and they open to 3x under the gun and you have pocket 8s. I really want to play pocket 8s against the fish. Like, even if I'm not super deep, even if I'm a bit shorter than 100 big blinds, I really want to play pocket 8s, but I don't really want to 3-bet 8s against the 60 big blind stack because, yeah, you guessed it, they're going to jam at a pretty high frequency and that's going to ruin 8s entirely. So this in my mind is a call and only a call. I think it's the only way to play, and I think anyone who 3-bets that hand there to 11 big blinds following a chart is basically just way too rigid and inflexible and is not making the best out of this situation. So there are loads of spots where you do actually just want to cold call pre, and knowing that it's fine in equilibrium, and you can simplify it to playing 3-bet or fold. I'm not saying that you can't do that, and that's a valid way to go, but knowing that it's not a catastrophe to flat with 8s, knowing that it's not this big scary taboo thing that will make you homeless, that's a good thing to know. Because when the situation changes exploitatively and you get a sense that it's now a better time to cold call 8s, well, that may well just be the front runner play. There's other hands here as well that you can cold call, like ace queen and king queen off and ace queen suited and ace 4 suited and 10s and jack 10 suited and stuff like this. No one ever really makes these plays. Most of the regs that watch this channel, you guys just won't be making these plays, but know that they're okay, and then you can find them when they're actually good. You don't have to do them as a default, but do know that they're not hemorrhaging money. Okay, on to the next one. Okay, flatting a 4-bet with a low suited connector. What's going on here? So in this situation, under the gun has gone ahead and raised. Hijack has 3-bet. Under the gun is 4-bet, and this is hijack's calling range. So this is a really early position battle. 7-6 and 6-5 and 5-4. These are hands that the solver did recommend that you 3-bet at some frequency in the first place hijack against under the gun. The reason for this is that you're unblocking a lot of the folding range of the under the gun player. Meanwhile, your hand is very live if called, and you even block some of the cold 4-bet bluffs behind you, like the ace-5 suited or ace-4 suited. Your hand is just very playable against large parts of that flattening range if you have to play the 3-bet pot. So that's why you 3-bet it in the first place. When they 4-bet you, you're obviously now instantly a dog with this hand, but it's actually quite a big mistake in equilibrium, half a big blind to be precise, to fold these hands to a 4-bet. What's going on here? Like, why should you fold Queen Jack but not 6-5? That's right, it all comes down to how live your cards are. With Queen Jack, you are dead when you hit pairs a bit more often. You're dominated by bigger pairs. You just have less ability to suck out against big cards because of that domination. The straights and stuff that you make, your opponents are going to bolt up on some of those textures, or their whole cards are going to block your outs in the first place for making that straight. Whereas with 6-5, everything is liver. Your hand is good more often when you hit it. You're not dominated as often. You have higher equity and higher implied odds and less reverse implied odds. So these hands are going to be pretty nifty to flat 4-bets with. If you do end up in this situation, the way to think of it is, okay, I'm here now. I've dug myself a hole. I'm not going to dig it any deeper by calling this. In fact, I will dig myself out of the hole very slightly. Imagine you dig yourself 20 feet underground and then you get the chance to climb 1 foot up. That's what you're doing when you flat the 6-5. You're not getting out of the hole. If dirt gets poured on you, you're still going to die in a horrible, suffocating earth in the esophagus kind of way. That's an awful image, isn't it? Sorry about that, guys. But, you know, 6-5 suited is clambering a little bit out of that hole, and it gives you slightly less negative EV for the whole hand than if you folded it. It's a really good idea to learn the difference between point of decision EV and whole hand EV. So from a whole hand perspective, it's still losing with 6-5 suited to call the 4-bet. It's losing 6.9 big blinds, but it's losing 7.5 to fold, because that's, after all, how much you've put into the pot. Be honest, how annoyed are you about the fact that I just told you to fold jacks on the button to a 3-bet? But I'm being sneaky. Of course, I don't mean that you opened, you know, the button and the big blind 3-bet you and you should fold jacks. If you fold jacks in that situation, it's not even just that you don't deserve to play the game and all of that nonsense, but probably you should just go to jail. Like, you should probably just go to real life jail if you fold jacks against the big blind 3-bet, because that is a sin that is beyond reprieve. Like, that is truly abhorrent. But what I'm talking about here is the under the gun opens. Let's say an early position open comes in, we get a fold from hijack, we get a 3-bet from the cutoff, and it folds to you. Well, it doesn't fold to you, you're next to act on the button. And this is your strategy. So jacks is break even. Like, you're allowed to fold here. And if the hand is balancing on a knife edge in equilibrium, then you get the drill by now. That means that in some real world scenarios, it's going to be really winning to 3-bet it, and others to 4-bet it, and then others it's going to be really losing to 4-bet it. So it might be really winning to 4-bet this hand against someone who 3-bets way too wide, right? They've got too many combos in their 3-bet range. You think they're picking on a weaker player and isolating them super wide or something like that. So you stand up to the bully and you're like, hey, leave that fish alone. That's my fish. You don't bully him. Only I'm allowed to bully him. Remember, you used to get bullies like that in high school that would like fight over victims. Did you ever get that? I'm sure that was a thing in my high school. My high school was pretty rough though, but that's another story. So basically the 4-bet that we make here with jacks, it doesn't make any money. And you can do it, but it's okay to let a good starting hand like this go. Like, when you first look at jacks, you don't want to let it go, right? Because you're looking at it and you're thinking, well, it's fish hooks, it's, do they call this walking sticks, or is that sevens? It's another name for jacks as well. You can let me know what that is in the comments. But yeah, you have these fish hooks and you think, well, the fish hooks are a good hand and they have paint all over them and I want to play them and I want a set of jacks. But realistically, like, if you do go ahead and actually 4-bet here, let's just fold this back round. Big blind folds, it comes back under the gun, who folds, and then cutoff has the following strategy here. And you can see that they do call you with some worse hands. So like, they are peeling this with 10s and 9s the times that they've 3-bet those. That won't be always. They're calling with some hand like Jack 10 or 10 9 that you're doing well against. Ace 5, Ace 4 you're doing well against. But you're not doing well against queens or aces. That's crushing you. And the real killer is just that too often they 4-bet you here, right? Like, the 4-bet happens 23% of the time. That's a lot of the time to be 4-bet. And when you are 4-bet here, like, you can't even really get it in with jacks, I don't think. Like, it's going to be, or sorry, 5-bet. I mean 5-bet. So when cutoff 5-bets here, I doubt it's even going to be like winning at all for you to get it in with jacks. Yeah, it's actually losing. It's like slightly worse to call it off than it is to fold. So the fact that you have to 4-bet fold, or that, like, at least 4-bet calling isn't winning, is evidence enough that 4-betting jacks there can't be a very good thing if you're getting 5-bet 25% of the time. So 100 BB stack depth where you're going to get jammed on a lot, this isn't so good. I don't know deeper, like, this probably becomes a bit more reasonable because they're going to have to play more call and less 5-bet against you. So if you're an awkward stack depth, like 130 big blinds, that's normally a pretty cool stack depth for 4-betting, because the would-be 5-better just is really handcuffed there and just doesn't have as many options to jam with a decent risk-reward ratio. So this is a situation where you can let go of jacks in these early configuration spots where there's an open and a 3-bet before you. But yeah, clearly I was tricking you with the title there. We don't want to open jacks in the button and fold to small blinds 3-bet. That's go to jail. Go directly to jail. Do not pass go. Do not collect a $200 buy-in. All right, next thing that we're going to look at today is this. Squeezing sixes, you say? What the hell is this about? So let's take a later position open now, because this won't happen so much in an early position. Cutoff opens to 2.5x. The button calls, which is a thing, by the way. Again, button doesn't become homeless because he calls the cutoffs raised like that. It's okay, like button is allowed to do that. I know that I vent a lot these days in my YouTube videos. I just have so many pet peeves from the industry, so you guys just have to excuse me as I'm venting. I'm not venting at you, I'm venting at just like certain things I've read or heard or whatever. And so this squeeze here with pocket sixes, this looks a little bit weird, right? Because you're like, well, that's a bad hand, and now there's two people in the pot and it doesn't have any good blockers. But the thing with sixes is that if you do squeeze and get called, you're going to have really good survivability. Like if we have a look at the reacting range here for, let's say, the cutoff opener to start with here, they have some jam and they have some smaller 4-bet going on here as well, but they have to find a lot of that to make your squeeze bad. And I think that people actually under 4-bet against squeezes in general. So exploitatively speaking, I would say that a squeeze with sixes in the small blind against a cutoff raise and a button call is one of these things that is actually like really printing money in the vast majority of low and micro stakes games. And the reason I say that is that the reg that's open just won't be playing enough jam or 4-bet, and I think the person who calls the button will normally be a fish. That's not to say, again, that it's bad to call on the button. You know, something can be an okay play, but it can still be only fish that make it. For example, it's okay to open 3.2x in the small blind, but hardly any regs ever do that. It's also okay to make it 4x in some situation, probably pre-flop as a strategy with certain hands, but that doesn't mean that any regs ever 4x pre. So basically, people who cold call the button, especially against the cutoff open, are going to be fish a really high amount of the time. That means that they're not really going to be playing much back jam at all. They're going to basically be really capped. You're going to have a big skill edge. And the reg that's to act before them is very rarely going to want the 4-bet because A, they want to keep the fish in the pot, and B, they just don't know that they can jam with jacks here or 4-bet with king 10 suited, and they're just going to miss those. Squeezes look scary. They're not things people find super light these days. Back in the day when a mere motive was enough to take a play, we'd be like, I'm going to call 7 high on this flop with no backdoors to steal the pot on the turn. And as long as you could claim to have a motive or a rationale or a plan, people love plans, right? My plan here was to take it away later. Oh yeah, good for you. That definitely makes calling 7 high good on the flop with no redraw on king, king, queen. Yeah, I'll call 7-5 with no redraw because you're going to steal it later. Anyway, I'm doing it again. I'm rambling, but you get the point. Regs don't do that anymore. They're not looking at a small blind squeezer anymore and saying, oh, this guy's just trying to steal. Like, that kind of ethos is gone, apart from in like every live game in every casino ever at 1, 2, and 2, 5. It still exists there. But in general, people are super tight online these days against squeezes, in my opinion, and therefore we could squeeze sixes. And if we go back to this original raid, could we even squeeze like pocket fives or something like that? Let's take a look. Well, the answer is no, but if it's a good enough spot, then maybe. So this hand is losing 14% of a big blind in theory as a squeeze. But ask yourself, what would it take to swing that 14% of a big blind into like the green here for this to become a more positive thing than folding? I would think it would take a fair bit, but having a really terrible fish on the button or something and having a really tight reg opening would probably be enough. Now, maybe calling is even higher EV, and you do have to factor this in with these pairs that like maybe you just want to call in the small blind. A lot of people just don't even call multi-way either. They're like, it's bad to call in the small blind. I can't, I won't do it. But it's fine. So like if you're not going to 3-bet this hand, if you're not going to squeeze sixes here against the cutoff, you know, unknown open and a button unknown flat, you should definitely call. Please, please, please don't fold sixes or even fives or even fours in this spot or 5-4 suited. Just play all of these hands because you're going to have a skill edge against the cold caller on the button, if not the reg that opened. And, you know, in equilibrium, these hands aren't losing any money. By the way, this solver's like, you can call deuces, but you can't call threes, but then you can call fours. Shut up, solver. Never listen to a solver when it tells you stuff like that. You're free. You can do as you want. Don't let it tell you what to do. It's a moron. Ace King offsuit. Has there ever been a more typical 3-bet hand? Like when you picture Ace King offsuit, do you not just imagine 3-betting it up to 12 big blinds? I know I do. However, Ace King offsuit can slow play. When you're in the big blind and under the gun opens, and this is the range we've got here, under the gun opening to 2.5, everybody getting out the way and it folding round to the big blind caller. Ace King off is a mix. It's actually calling it some frequency. As long as you don't fold here, you can't go too wrong. What I'd like to point out is just how bad this hand actually is in terms of EV. When you call here, you're only making half a big blind with Ace King off, and it's the same when you 3-bet. You're only plus EV for half a big blind. I think people think this hand is way better than it is. This hand becomes kind of mediocre quite quickly as soon as the opener's position is early. And if this hand gets 4-bet, it's going to be like kind of miserable. So against whom would you actually want to take this play? Like who would you just want to call ace king against? Well, not that many people. I think in reality, it's way more likely that you'd want to 3-bet than it is that you'd want to call. And so this is an exploit that I would only recommend for some really rare extreme cases. But here's the thing. Ace king offsuit is an excellent bluff catcher in more than one way. Post flop, if the board is deuce deuce 4, there isn't really a better bluff catcher than ace king off in your range. Bluff catcher being a hand that doesn't beat value, it does beat all of the bluffs in your opponent's range or is significantly far ahead of them. So ace king off is a great bluff catcher because it has really nutty redraw where you're going to dominate your opponent's outs and you're going to win really big pots on an ace or a king run out. But also, you just have a lot of robustness, like your hand is just in good shape and you can win against bluffs. So if you think your opponent is the type to be really spewy and aggressive with the betting lead, like you just have a read that they see bet way too often, they bet turn way too often, that kind of thing, then flatting ace king is going to be a nice idea, possibly, and it might be exploits that make 3-betting even better in that situation. But if we look at this player type in isolation for now, it's going to be really cool to just like call flop on king XX and watch them just barrel off into your ace king. So I do think there's a few rare times when you can make this play, but I want to put it on the agenda. I want to show you that it's not a mistake, because if you watch me play poker right now and I was streaming and I flatted ace king, big blind against under the gun, and you were to look at the chat, God forbid you were to read the chat on Twitch, what you would see is a bunch of people going, "Oh, you can't do that, Pete, you're bad player, you're bad." And the reason they're going to say that is that they just don't see anyone do that. And when you're a kind of weak poker player, or when you're just learning the game, you learn by copying, right? Humans are really social creatures. We learn by copying one another. Monkey see, monkey do is actually quite an effective way of learning in some walks of life. If you imagine how like a 3-year-old toddler learns from their parents, it's very much copying and trying to emulate the behavior of the parents. And that's what good parents do. They model good behavior for their child to copy. But when it comes to learning poker, not all of the things that you never see are bad. As we've seen in today's video, there are lots of things pre-flop that are actually good, even though you never see them. And the same is definitely true post-flop as well. Maybe I should do a post-flop equivalent of this video. If you're enjoying this, let me know in the comments, like the video, and that'll give me some encouragement that I should make a post-flop rendition of this as well, because there's hundreds of times more plays like this post-flop that no one ever makes that you can make. So maybe we should do it there too. What are all the plays that we can make but never make? All right, next one. Ace king suited is one of these hands that is in absolutely dominant shape in late position. So when you have ace king suited and you open the button, and big blind, who let's not forget has a really polarized range compared to the small blind, 3-bets you, their range looks a bit like this. They have a lot of bad suited aces and kings in there. They have offsuit aces in there. They have king 9 off in there, stuff like this. If they're building that range correctly, then ace king suited is the sort of bluff catching trappy hand that dominates the hell out of their holdings. And for that reason, it can go ahead and actually slow play at some frequency. In the sim, there is no EV loss by calling ace king suited, but button versus big blind facing a 3-bet. But again, if I was to do this on stream, you would have hordes of people saying, "What a whale. He didn't take this play of 4-betting. Everybody knows that ace king suited is a 4-bet here." And it is against the vast majority of your opponents. You know, if you put me against some random player, I'm probably just going to want to 4-bet the ace king, because I feel like people just fold too much to 4-bets, which is good for ace king. You're cleaning up a big pot and a ton of equity there if you make them fold some random hand with 2 live cards, like you're doing really well. Like if they fold 8-7 suited, for example, of a different suit to your ace king, that's really good. But there'll be other opponents that are very aggressive with their 3-bets out of the big blind and aggressive post-flop and just don't play very well in 3-bet pots. And against them, you may well want to quote-unquote smooth call, classic old-school slow play kind of thing with the ace-king suited. It's funny because like back in the day when they played in like the 80s and 70s and stuff, people just called 3-bets with ace-king suited because 3-bets were usually aces, yet they couldn't bring themselves to fold ace-king suited. But now we can do it for a different reason, that people are sufficiently wide enough, they're polar enough, that we can dominate the shit out of a lot of their bluffs and we can play this hand in position post flop. So don't write this play off. There's definitely a time and a place for it, even though it looks a bit absurd. There's something really nice, there's something quite sexy, I think, about the 5 deuce suited. Like what a cool hand, the old 52 of clubs, you know? This is one of my favorites. This hand is actually like hilariously better to call than it is to do anything else with. Look how much EV you lose if you fold 5 deuce suited, big blind versus small blind to a 3x. You lose like 17% of a big blind. That's wild, right? That's like absolutely crazy. And this hand is just live, you know, it's like 2 low cards, it can make it straight, you're in position, villain's range is super wide. Being in position against a really wide opening range is just a massively powerful thing. People totally underestimate when they're in the big blind the importance of position, and they overestimate the importance of their hand rank. This is one of the spots where you can have the biggest edge in the game tree. So when you see me playing in a pool, like with the challenge I'm doing right now, where I think I have a big edge, you're going to see me actually flatting way wider than this. So I might get here with 7 deuce suited, and I might look at this and say, well, okay, it's meant to be losing 13% of a big blind for me to call, but I think people play so tragically in the small blind versus blind post flop. It is a really hard situation to get right. When they check, they're just surrendering, they're waving the white flag way too frequently. When they bet, they're range betting too often, they're opening themselves up to aggression. People are just not playing good strategies blind versus blind out of position at mid stakes, low stakes, micro stakes for the most part. Obviously, the better regs at like 200 and stuff like that are going to have pretty well crafted strategies. But for the most part, this is a spot that I really feel sorry for live players that they don't get to play this spot. One of the things I hate most in the whole world, like not just in poker, but in the entire world, like I hate it as much as I hate like famine and war and stuff like that, is when people chop blind versus blind. You know, when it's like it folds around to the small blind in a live game and they'll like chop it up, yeah, let's chop it up. And I sit there thinking, like, this is very rare that I play live poker, but when I see this, I'm like, guys, I turn into an uber nerd and I go red in the face and my glasses crack and fall off my face and I'm like, you guys are failing to take part in one of the most exciting spots in the whole game. It's a wide range situation. Yeah, I really like that spot, blind versus blind. So there's a big edge available here that's not just 5 deuce, but you can call like 9-7 off and you can call 10-8 off and you can 3-bet, as we've said, like super wide in this spot. But there really are like no limits to the calling range here. Like even if you want to take like 4-3 off against like a whale here and say, do you know what? I'm losing 15% of a big blind in theory by playing this hand, but actually I think it's going to be not that different to 5-4 against this player because most of my EV just comes from like stabbing the flop with 70% fold equity when they check instead of the 30 I'm meant to have for 40% pot that I'm betting or whatever. So big one, this is a huge thing. You can defend your big blind like an absolute maniac if you think you have a skill edge, because this is one of the spots where that skill edge translates to the maximum. And last but not least, we have the sort of 3-bet that's maybe a bit more commonly found by the audience watching this. Like you guys maybe do this from time to time. It's not as obscure as like the 3-bet with the 10-7 off or whatever. But this is definitely a play that people don't make enough collectively. And that play is the 3-bet bluffing of offsuit big cards in a situation like big blind against cutoff or big blind against hijack or whatever. Against button might even be a bit less of this with certain big cards because they're actually doing a bit better as a call. But the idea with a hand like king 10 off here is that the hand isn't really that great as a call. It's only marginally better to call it 13% of a big blind to be precise than it is to fold it, and therefore 3-betting it as a bluff with a bit of removal to the opponent's 4-bet range is going to be fine too. Remember that when your opponent flats your 3-bet, a lot of their hands are actually going to be pocket pairs, right? So if you look at cutoff's flatting range here, they're calling like tons and tons of pocket pairs and even some dominated like suited connectors to king 10. So king 10 again has way more of this survivability than you would think. We imagine that hand as being kind of more dead than it is when our 3-bet gets called. So yeah, king 10 off, jack 10 off, this sort of hand, queen jack off, nothing wrong with making these 3-bets. Even like ace 9 and ace 8 are getting in here. Don't take it too far. If you 3-bet ace deuce off here, like you're hemorrhaging quite a bit of money in theory, and I don't think out of position you're going to have as big an edge as you will in position, so it's going to be harder to justify going nuts here based on a skill edge like we talked about in the previous one. But yeah, there's a lot of offsuit Broadway aggression being missed here. These hands do have more going for them than you would think, both in terms of removal and in terms of their survivability if called and how much equity they actually have. Hope you liked this video. It was a little bit of a different angle on how to get better at poker. A lot of people do neglect preflop, so if you liked it, head over to carrotcorner.com, check out all of our paid content there. Do smash that like button that's popping up on your screen, hopefully, and I will see you back here on YouTube for another video very soon. Take it easy, guys. Much love, and have a great festive season and Christmas and all of that. If that's coming up, it probably is not that far away by the time this gets released. All right, all the best. Take it easy.